She humiliated him in front of everyone. "Fix this helicopter, and I'll marry you right now." The room burst out laughing, until the janitor dropped his mop, touched the $38 million machine, and brought it roaring back to life. When the dust cleared, the CEO realized too late she hadn't made a joke. She'd started the story that would destroy her pride forever. Before we dive in, where are you watching from, and what kind of story do you want next? Drop it in the comments. And if stories like this pull you in and don't let go, hit subscribe. Another powerful one's coming tomorrow. Now let's begin. The hangar pulsed with the hard white light of failure. $38 million of engineering sat motionless under the flood lamps, its rotor blades still as a coffin lid. Every sound, paper shuffling, a throat clearing, felt too loud. Then a voice cut through it. Precise. Cold. "Fix this helicopter, and I'll marry you right now." Gasps. Laughter that sounded like fear. At the center of the glare stood Elena Voss, the youngest CEO in Voss Aerotech's history, tailored magenta suit gleaming against the gray steel around her. Her empire was precision, emotion was weakness. Across the floor, a janitor froze with a mop in his hand. Dirty water dripped onto polished aluminum, each drop echoing like a countdown. His name, no one cared to remember. Elena's eyes sliced toward him. "You've been staring at my helicopter for 10 minutes. See something the engineers don't." More laughter. Cameras rose. Even the technicians leaned in. The janitor's reply came softly, almost a warning. "Maybe I do, ma'am." A pause. The kind that rearranges a room. Elena stepped closer, heels cracking against the floor. She smelled of jet fuel and cold perfume. "Is that so?" Her voice was the edge of a scalpel. "Then prove it." She gestured toward the silent aircraft, her smile all blade. "If you can make that machine fly, right here, right now, I'll marry you." The words hung in the air like shrapnel. The janitor didn't move, didn't blink, only looked at the machine as though listening to a heartbeat no one else could hear. Somewhere inside him, something long buried began to turn, an instinct, a memory of engines and sandstorms and the lives he once kept aloft. Elena expected fear. She got silence, and in that silence, something in her shifted, just enough to be noticed. "Do we have a deal?" she asked. "We do," he said. The mop clattered to the floor. The laughter died as he walked toward the helicopter. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The night before had been quiet in a way Daniel Cole didn't trust. The kind of silence that comes after too many storms, when the world seems to wait for the next one. His small apartment sat 2 blocks from the industrial district, a converted warehouse with paper-thin walls, creaking pipes, and the faint smell of machine oil that clung to everything he owned. Inside, the only light came from a single desk lamp and the soft blue glow of his son's nightlight, shaped like a tiny helicopter, spinning a faint circle of light across the ceiling. Eli was already half asleep, his dark curls spread across the pillow, one arm thrown over a crayon drawing of a helicopter taped beside his bed. The drawing was lopsided but full of imagination, twin rotors, little stick figures waving beneath it. Across the bottom, in uneven block letters, Eli had written, "Me and Dad fixed the sky." Daniel sat at the edge of the bed, running a hand over the blanket. The boy stirred. "Dad." "Yeah, buddy," Daniel whispered. Eli blinked sleepily, his voice soft. "Do you think you could fix anything that's broken?" The question made Daniel pause. He looked at the boy, the only thing in the world that still made sense, and felt the familiar ache tugging beneath his ribs. "I can try," he said finally, managing a smile. The boy's lips curved in a tired grin. "That's what you always say." "That's because it's true." Daniel tucked the blanket up to Eli's chin, smoothing it once more than necessary. "Now get some sleep, Captain. Big day tomorrow." Eli's eyes drifted closed. "Love you, Dad. Love you more." For a long moment, Daniel sat there, watching his son's chest rise and fall. The apartment was filled with the small sounds of ordinary life. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, the muffled rumble of traffic outside. Ordinary but fragile. He stood, turned off the lamp, and stepped into the narrow hallway where the glow of the city leaked through the blinds like liquid gold. He stopped at the small table near the door. On it sat an old photo, faded, edges curled. His wife, Sarah, holding Eli as a baby, sunlight catching the ring on her finger. Daniel touched the frame, his thumb tracing the smile he could barely remember hearing anymore. "He's doing good, sir," he murmured. "You'd be proud." But the words felt hollow. He wasn't sure who he was saying them for, her or himself. He sank into the chair beside the window, staring out at the skyline. Somewhere beyond the warehouses, he could see the blinking red lights of the Aerotech hangars. Sometimes, if the wind was right, he could hear the faint thrum of a helicopter testing overhead. That sound used to mean adrenaline, purpose, survival. Now it only reminded him of everything he'd left behind. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the years folded away like pages. Flashback, Mosul, 6 years ago. Heat. Blinding, blistering, endless. The kind that baked sand into glass and made skin feel like it was burning from the inside. The air around the tarmac shimmered with it. A Black Hawk sat in the dust, one rotor half-locked, whining with a pitch that meant death if it wasn't fixed fast. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, calm and steady despite the gunfire echoing in the distance. "Pull the intake cover, now." A young corporal scrambled, hands shaking, wrench slipping. "Sir, it's jammed." Daniel didn't hesitate. He yanked the tool from the soldier's hand, crouched beside the engine, and shoved his arm into the intake, feeling for the blockage. His sleeve tore open against the jagged metal. Blood slicked his arm. He didn't care. "Get me a flashlight." The corporal fumbled one over. Daniel leaned closer, sweat dripping into his eyes. The blockage was deep, a shard of debris wedged where it shouldn't be. He gritted his teeth, twisted, pulled. The piece came loose with a snap, slicing his knuckles open. The engine roared to life, coughing sand. He stepped back, heart pounding, as the rotors spun faster, catching speed, whirling the desert into a storm of dust. The crew chief gave him a thumbs up from the cockpit. They lifted off seconds later. 12 lives saved because one man refused to wait for permission. Daniel had watched them disappear into the horizon, the blades fading into a hum that blended with his heartbeat. That day, they'd started calling him the man who fixed the sky. The sound of sirens brought him back to the present. He opened his eyes, heart still racing, sweat cooling on his palms. The city outside was alive again, neon and noise. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. There had been a time when fixing things felt like saving the world. Engines, rotors, turbines, all obeying the laws of physics, all reparable if you were smart enough, fast enough, brave enough. But grief didn't obey physics. It corroded silently, one memory at a time, until all you had left was a heartbeat and a promise to keep your kids safe. Daniel rubbed a hand over his face, pushing back exhaustion. He glanced at the old duffel by the door. His toolkit was still inside, military-issued, polished, complete. He hadn't opened it in 6 years. But tonight, he thought about it. Just for a second. He thought about the test scheduled for tomorrow, the prototype medical helicopter that half the company had been whispering about for weeks. He'd seen the engineers working late, heard them curse through the vents. He even caught a glimpse of the machine once, all carbon fiber and ambition. And though he wasn't supposed to care, he did. He always would. But that world didn't want him anymore. The man who fixed the sky was now the man who mopped its floor. He exhaled slowly, stood, and went to check the door locks. Once, twice, a third time. Routine was control, and control kept the ghosts quiet. Before turning off the hallway light, he glanced once more into Eli's room. The boy slept with one arm around a plush airplane, the faint whir of the nightlight filling the silence. Daniel smiled, but his eyes were tired. He whispered, "Sleep well, kiddo. Tomorrow's just another day." That ordinary tomorrow came like a test he didn't study for. The next morning, Daniel woke before dawn. He packed Eli's lunch, peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, a note scribbled on the napkin that said you're braver than you think. He dropped his son off at school, waved until the boy disappeared behind the glass doors, then drove to work in his old Chevy pickup that coughed like a smoker and refused to die. At the hangar, the day unfolded like every other. Routine. Predictable. Safe. He liked safe. He liked invisible. By mid-morning, though, tension began to buzz through the building. Engineers rushing between offices. Voices sharp over intercoms. Daniel caught fragments of talk. Engine lock. Fuel pressure drop. Client waiting. Words that told him something was wrong. He pretended not to hear. He kept mopping. Still, his eyes drifted toward the hangar's far end, where the new prototype, the H-90, sat under spotlights like a sleeping giant. He couldn't help noticing how one of the diagnostic screens flickered, almost imperceptibly. A tiny error code pulsed in the corner, one he recognized, the same kind of warning he used to dream about in the desert. He tightened his grip on the mop handle, forcing himself to look away. That's not your job anymore. But the old instincts were already awake, whispering at the back of his mind. The hum of machinery, the faint rattle in the fuel pump line. He could feel the imbalance like a pulse under his skin. It would fail. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And for reasons he couldn't explain, that thought made his chest ache. When his shift ended, Daniel drove home in silence. The city faded behind him, replaced by long rows of dark warehouses and the flicker of distant neon. He parked, climbed the stairs, and stood for a long time outside his apartment door before going in. Inside, the air was warm and still. Eli's drawings covered the fridge, more helicopters, some flying over cities, others carrying little stick figures with smiling faces. Daniel's heart squeezed. He sat at the kitchen table, opened his worn leather wallet, and pulled out an old photo. Sarah again, this time sitting on the hood of his Jeep, sunlight on her hair. She used to call him fearless. But she was wrong. He was afraid of everything now, of losing again, of failing again, of being seen again. He stayed like that for a while, lost in the past. Then a faint sound caught his ear, the whir of a helicopter far off, invisible in the night. He rose, walked to the window, and looked up. A single aircraft blinked across the sky, its lights gliding through the clouds like slow-moving stars. He followed it until it disappeared beyond the horizon. His jaw tightened. The ache in his chest returned, deeper this time, heavier. It wasn't envy. It was calling. Something in him whispered, "You're not done yet." But Daniel shook his head, exhaled, and turned away from the window. He didn't notice how his hands trembled as he reached to turn off the light. The night closed in around him, quiet and sure. Somewhere in the distance, a machine coughed, stalled, and died. What would you have done in his place? Walk away from the life that broke you? Or fix it one last time? Tell me what you think in the comments, because Daniel's story is only just beginning. The city was still half asleep when Elena Voss started running. Dawn had just begun to brush gold over the Hudson, a thin ribbon of light trembling across the water's surface. Her breath came out in sharp, even bursts, controlled, mechanical, as if her lungs had been programmed for precision. Every morning began this way. 6 miles, same route, same time, same silence. Her sneakers struck the pavement in rhythm with the river's pulse. To anyone watching, she looked flawless, the embodiment of discipline. But inside, something darker moved, a tension she refused to name. The kind that never really slept. As the skyline stretched ahead, the wind tangled strands of hair across her face. She ignored it. Her body moved like clockwork, each motion honed by years of refusing to slow down. Slowing down meant remembering. Remembering meant feeling. And feeling was the one thing she couldn't afford. When she finally stopped, the sun had cleared the skyline. She stood at the railing overlooking the river, sweat glistening on her temples, chest heaving. Below, the water shimmered like liquid steel, beautiful, untouchable. Just like her. Inside her penthouse, silence ruled. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the city's early light, casting her reflection in perfect symmetry, sharp lines, immaculate edges, not a thing out of place. The space was vast, almost sterile. No plants. No photos. No trace of anyone but her. The only sound came from the low hum of the treadmill cooling down and the faint buzz of her phone on the kitchen counter. Elena crossed the room, grabbed a glass of water, and leaned against the marble island. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the empty second chair at the counter. She looked away almost instantly, as if punishing herself for the pause. The phone buzzed again, a call this time. The name on the screen made her jaw tighten, Nurse Halloran. She hesitated, thumb hovering before she answered. "Ms. Voss," the nurse said, voice soft, practiced. "Your father had another episode last night. He's stable now, but he asked for you." Elena's eyes stayed on the skyline. Her reflection in the glass looked like someone else, smaller, almost human. "I'm in meetings all day," she replied, tone clipped. I understand, the nurse said quietly. He keeps forgetting, but he always asks for you. A long silence hung between them. Then Elena said, "Send me the updated chart," and ended the call. The sound of disconnection echoed louder than it should have. Her father had been the empire before she was. Voss Aerotech wasn't just a company. It was a monument to his obsession with perfection. When he built his first rotor prototype, she was 7, sitting on a workbench with a wrench too big for her hands. He taught her how to read schematics before she could ride a bike. "If it doesn't fly right, you didn't love it enough," he used to say. Her mother never understood that kind of love. A flight instructor with laughter that filled a room, she believed in adventure, in risk, in sky over safety. The crash changed that. One engine failure, one storm too many. After that, the laughter was gone, and her father's obsession turned into armor. When he had his stroke years later, Elena didn't cry. She took over his office before the hospital bed was even cold. The press called it ambition. It wasn't. It was survival. Because the truth, the one she'd never say aloud, was that she was terrified of what would happen if she stopped moving. The morning routine continued with military precision. Shower, black coffee, emails sorted by urgency. 3 contracts signed before 8 a.m. Everything neat, compartmentalized, contained. That was her gift, containment. Her assistant, Jenna, arrived exactly on time, carrying 2 tablets and the day's agenda. Morning, Ms. Voss. The Seattle investors confirmed the 9 a.m. test. Engineering says the H-90 is ready. Elena's eyes didn't lift from her screen. And the diagnostics? Stable, ma'am. All systems cleared last night. Good, Elena said. Her tone was cool, but her fingers tapped once, barely perceptible, against the table's edge. She hated uncertainty. Machines failed because people got emotional. And emotion was a virus she refused to catch. Jenna hesitated, then asked, "Will you be attending the demonstration in person?" Elena looked up, eyes like polished glass. "I don't miss first flights." Her assistant nodded quickly. Understood. As Jenna turned to leave, Elena's voice stopped her. "You ever wonder," she said suddenly, "why leadership feels like solitude?" Jenna blinked, caught off guard. "I can't say I've thought about it, ma'am." Elena's expression didn't change. "It's because you can't love people and lead them." "Not really." Then she went back to her screen. Conversation over. Hours later, she was in the car heading north toward the test facility. The city thinned, replaced by long stretches of highway and fields glittering with frost. The driver didn't speak. No one ever did when she was in the car. She stared out the tinted window, the glass reflecting her own face back at her, immaculate, unreadable. Somewhere along the route, they passed a hospital. She glanced at the sign and quickly looked away. Her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. "Lincoln Elementary Robotics Club. Thank you for your donation, Ms. Voss. The kids love the lights." She frowned. "What donation?" she muttered. "Ma'am," the driver asked. "Nothing," she said quickly, locking the screen. She had a dozen charitable contributions automated each quarter. But this one wasn't familiar. She didn't have time to think about it. The facility loomed ahead, glass and steel under the winter sun. The moment she stepped into the hangar, the noise hit her like heat. The buzz of equipment, the hum of conversation, the echo of orders barked across metal. Her heels clicked against the floor, commanding instant silence. Technicians straightened. Engineers adjusted their badges. Elena surveyed the prototype, its polished body gleaming under the floodlights. The H-90 looked perfect, but perfection made her nervous. It always hid something. "Diagnostics?" she asked. "All green," one of the lead engineers replied. "Fuel, pressure, hydraulics, everything checks out." "Good," she said, though her eyes lingered on a small flicker in one of the side monitors, so brief she almost missed it. She turned away before anyone noticed her hesitation. "Begin pretest." They scattered to obey. As the machines powered up, the smell of jet fuel filled the air, sharp, chemical, intoxicating. For Elena, it smelled like control, like legacy. Still, that flicker on the monitor wouldn't leave her mind. A memory rose, uninvited. Her father's hand guiding hers over a circuit board, his voice low. "The sky doesn't forgive arrogance, Ellie. Always listen before you fly." She'd forgotten that voice until now, and she hated that she remembered. When she returned to her office an hour later, the city outside had fully woken. Helicopters dotted the skyline like insects in glass. She sank into her chair, eyes unfocused. On the desk beside her, a framed newspaper clipping. Elena Voss named youngest CEO in aerotech history. She'd never liked that photo. She looked too human in it. The intercom buzzed softly. Ms. Voss, engineering just confirmed the final test at 9 a.m. She pressed the button. I'll be there. Then silence. She leaned back, eyes closing for just a moment, letting the hum of the city filter in, car horns, sirens, distant blades cutting air. It all sounded the same after a while. Success had a frequency. Loneliness did too. She opened her eyes again, glancing around the immaculate office, glass, chrome, symmetry. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and cold coffee. Not a photo, not a plant, not a single sign that someone actually lived here. This was her world. Controlled. Predictable. Empty. The clock on her phone struck 8:47 a.m. She was reaching for her jacket when the device buzzed with a new notification. The preview line stopped her breath mid-motion. Test flight scheduled, 9 a.m., Hangar B. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but she didn't open it right away. The text wasn't new. She'd known the schedule for days. But something about it, maybe the way it glowed against the dark background, maybe the sudden heaviness in her chest, made her pause. She stood by the window, the skyline gleaming behind her. Somewhere out there, the prototype sat waiting, $38 million and her reputation balanced on its blades. And somewhere in that same building, a janitor she'd never noticed before was cleaning the floor, unseen, unheard. Elena didn't know it yet, but by noon, their worlds would collide. And the woman who ruled the sky would finally learn what it meant to fall. If you were her, powerful, feared, but utterly alone, would you have stopped running long enough to feel something? Tell me what you think in the comments. Because the moment she walked into that hangar, fate was already waiting for her. The hangar felt like a cathedral built from steel and fear. Every sound, metal clinking, paper rustling, someone clearing a throat, was magnified by the vast emptiness around them. The prototype helicopter sat at the center like a sleeping god, its body gleaming under floodlights, its reflection rippling across the polished floor. And standing just beneath its shadow was a man in a janitor's uniform, wiping his palms on a rag, steady as a surgeon about to operate. Daniel didn't rush. He moved with an ease that unnerved the engineers. They expected panic, fumbling, maybe even a retreat. Instead, he simply approached the aircraft, eyes scanning the panels with quiet authority, as if he'd built the machine himself. Around him, the room murmured. "What's he doing?" someone whispered. "He's going to break it worse," muttered another. "He's touching a $38 million prototype," hissed a third. Elena stood at the edge of the platform, arms crossed, her usual smirk tugging at one corner of her mouth. But it wasn't the same as before. Something in her expression had shifted. Less mockery, more intrigue. Daniel's fingertips brushed the metal frame. His touch was deliberate, reverent, almost tracing the curves of the air intake, the smooth, cold panels of the cowling. The smell of oil and jet fuel thickened in the air, and for a moment, all the white-collar confidence in the room faltered. He bent low, listening, not to the people, not to the noise, but to the silence of the machine itself. The hangar lights flickered once, buzzing faintly overhead. He could almost hear his past in that hum. The sandstorms, the rotor whine, the chaos of engines under siege. His body remembered what his mind tried to forget. "Get him away from that turbine," one engineer hissed. "He'll strip the housing." But Daniel didn't stop. He reached for the tool cart at the edge of the platform, tools he wasn't supposed to touch, and pulled out a torque wrench. His hands, though rough and calloused, handled it with precision that made even the most skeptical techs pause. Elena tilted her head slightly. "You seem awfully sure of yourself, Mr. Cole," she said. Daniel glanced up briefly, then back at the machine. "Not sure," he said. "Just listening." "Listening?" she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. He didn't look at her this time. "Engines talk," he murmured. "You just have to know the language." The words hung in the air, heavier than the whir of the distant fans. He loosened a bolt, then another, his movements hypnotic in their rhythm. Click, turn, release. Sweat began to bead at his temple under the harsh white light, sliding down the side of his face. A few of the younger engineers leaned in, forgetting themselves, drawn by the quiet mastery unfolding before them. "Sir, you're going to void the diagnostic protocols," one of them said, voice trembling somewhere between warning and awe. Daniel didn't even look up. "Your diagnostics are reading fine because the residue isn't showing in the sensors," he said calmly. "You've got metallic dust clogging the compressor intake. Won't catch it unless you pull the housing manually." Elena blinked, the words catching her off guard. "How do you?" He interrupted softly. "You'll want to step back, ma'am," he said, wiping his hands once more on the rag. "When it starts, it kicks dust." The crowd went utterly still. It was the first time anyone had heard him give a direct order. Even Elena, so accustomed to control, obeyed without thinking. She stepped back. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Daniel slid his hand along the side panel, found the latch, and pulled. The sound of metal disengaging echoed across the hangar. He reached inside, his arms steady, movements sure. A flick of his wrist dislodged a clump of metallic grit that shimmered faintly in the light like fine sand. "Impossible," one engineer muttered under his breath. Daniel ignored him. He cleaned the intake, sealed it again, and stepped back slowly. Every motion was methodical, confident, unhurried. He didn't need to prove himself. He just needed the machine to breathe again. When he finally looked up, his gaze met Elena's. There was no triumph in it, no arrogance. Only quiet certainty. "Try it now," he said. The lead engineer hesitated, looking at Elena for permission. She nodded, wordless. The ignition sequence began. The room filled with mechanical hum. Low at first, then higher, a deep, living growl that built in the pit of every chest present. The rotors twitched once, groaned, then spun faster, until the noise rose to a deafening roar. The helicopter came alive. Wind blasted through the hangar, papers scattering, coats whipping in the sudden storm of motion. The once still machine hovered inches off the ground, its shadow trembling on the walls. Every head turned toward Daniel, disbelief painted across their faces. He stood there, calm as ever, eyes steady on the aircraft. To him, it wasn't a miracle. It was muscle memory. Someone began to clap. Then another. Soon the sound filled the hangar, echoing against the steel beams. Elena didn't clap. She couldn't. Her fingers, still crossed over her chest, had gone cold. Her mouth was dry. The smirk she'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by something foreign, something dangerously close to awe. She watched as Daniel turned to her, wiping his hands on his rag once more. The rag was filthy, streaked with oil, but his face was composed, eyes clear. "There," he said simply. "She flies." It wasn't pride. It wasn't defiance. It was a statement of fact. Elena took a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "You," she started, then stopped. He tilted his head. "I what?" She searched for words. For an insult, maybe. For authority. But all she found was silence. "Nothing," she said finally, the word coming out softer than intended. The crowd began to disperse, whispers buzzing like static. The engineers tried to explain it away. Luck, coincidence, unorthodox technique. But none of it mattered. The machine had lived again, and they all knew who'd done it. Daniel reached down, picked up his mop, and placed it gently back in the bucket. "You said you'd marry me," he said quietly. Laughter rippled through the room again, but this time it felt nervous, unsure. Elena met his eyes, caught off guard by his tone. There was no mockery in it, only a calm sincerity that stripped her of the power she'd used to humiliate him. He went on, "Don't worry. I don't need that. Just one thing." Elena's throat tightened. "What?" He looked her straight in the eye. "My son's school. Lincoln Elementary. Their lights have been out for weeks. Maybe your company could send someone to fix the wiring." The request hit harder than any retort could have. Simple. Human. Elena said nothing. Her mind, trained to measure, calculate, dominate, had no algorithm for humility. Daniel didn't wait for her response. He turned, pushed his cart toward the exit, and vanished through the hangar doors, leaving the sound of the still whirring rotors behind him. The engineers exchanged glances. Someone muttered, "Who was that guy?" Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. Her pulse was still unsteady, and her reflection in the glass wall looked different, softer, almost uncertain. She turned back toward the helicopter, its rotors now slowing to silence. The faint smell of oil lingered in the air, mingled with something else, something that felt uncomfortably like humility. That night, she replayed the scene in her mind over and over. His steady hands, the quiet authority, the way he'd refused her mockery with grace. For years, she'd believed control meant power. But today, for the first time, she'd witnessed power that didn't need control at all. If you were her, standing there as the crowd gasped, and the man you'd mocked brought your empire back to life, what would you have said? Would you have apologized? Or like Elena, would you have stayed frozen in pride? Tell me in the comments, because what happens next will test every wall she's ever built. The rotors slowed to a soft hum, like a heartbeat fading after a storm. The hangar smelled of burnt air and oil, the kind of scent that clung to the skin and stayed in the memory. For a long moment, no one moved. The applause that had erupted moments earlier had scattered into stunned silence, replaced by the electric quiet of disbelief. Only the faint clicking of cooling metal filled the space. Elena Voss stood rooted to the floor, her reflection trembling in the polished steel of the helicopter. Around her, engineers exchanged glances, whispers rising like static. Some were grinning in awe, others frowning in confusion, trying to reconcile what they'd just witnessed. A janitor. No, a man they hadn't truly seen until now, doing in 20 minutes what their best teams couldn't in 2 weeks. A phone flash went off, someone recording the moment for posterity or maybe gossip, and that sound snapped her back into her body. She blinked, squared her shoulders, and forced her voice to emerge. "You actually did it," she said. Her tone tried to carry authority, but even she could hear the crack beneath it. Daniel turned to her, calm as if he'd just fixed a broken faucet instead of resurrecting a multi-million-dollar aircraft. "You said you'd marry me," he said, his voice level, not challenging, just reminding. The engineers' heads turned sharply toward him. A few chuckled nervously, unsure if it was humor or audacity. Elena's throat tightened. Heat crawled up her neck, the humiliation stinging sharper than before. She opened her mouth, ready to reassert dominance, to say something cutting that would remind everyone who owned this place. But Daniel beat her to it. "I don't need that," he said gently, wiping his hands on a rag. "Just one thing." The quiet that followed was total. Even the ventilation seemed to hush. Elena blinked, thrown off balance by his calm. "What could you possibly want?" she asked. "A promotion? Money?" Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "My son's school, Lincoln Elementary," he said. "Their power's been out for weeks. The kids can't run their robotics club anymore. Maybe your company could send a crew. That's all I want." The words hit her like a wrench to the chest. He wasn't joking. He wasn't asking for reward, validation, or recognition. He was asking her, the woman who mocked him, for light. Not for himself, but for his child. Somewhere behind them, a young engineer whispered, "He's serious." Another muttered, "He's not even asking for anything for himself." Elena felt their eyes shift, away from him and onto her. The balance in the room had changed, and she could feel it like a physical thing. Her authority, so absolute just an hour ago, suddenly felt paper-thin. Daniel folded the rag neatly, slipped it into his pocket, and looked around the hangar once more. His expression carried no smugness, no triumph. Only quiet fatigue, and something she couldn't name. Grace, maybe. Dignity. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. "You," she started, but her throat failed her. He nodded once. "That's all," he said softly. "You take care of people. Machines last longer." And with that, he turned. He picked up his mop, his bucket, and began pushing them toward the far doors, as though the miracle that had just unfolded was nothing more than another task checked off his list. No one moved to stop him. No one dared. Elena stood there, surrounded by people she'd commanded for years, yet suddenly she felt more alone than ever. The sound of his mop wheels on concrete echoed as he left, a slow, steady rhythm that somehow felt like judgment. When the hangar doors finally swung closed behind him, the silence he left behind was heavier than any applause could have been. Up in her glass-walled office hours later, Elena replayed the security footage in solitude. The video showed Daniel at work, his focus, his control, the reverence in the way he touched the machine. She zoomed in on his hands, the the precise movements, the moment the engine flared back to life. It wasn't luck. It was mastery. And she'd mocked him. Her reflection in the glass looked harsher under the office light. The woman staring back at her wasn't the ice queen the press adored. She was smaller, meaner somehow. She realized that she had spent years mistaking cruelty for power and control for respect. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. The media wants a statement about the test flight success. Should we credit the engineering team? Elena stared at the text for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she typed a single word. No. She deleted it before hitting send. She didn't know what the truth was yet, or if she even deserved to tell it. She set the phone aside and leaned back in her chair, exhaling for what felt like the first time all day. The silence pressed in on her, and for once she didn't fight it. Her father's voice echoed faintly in memory, his gravelly tone from years ago when she'd first taken over the company. You'll have to be tougher than any man in the room, Ellie. Don't let them see weakness. Don't let them see you. She'd built her empire on those words. And now, for the first time, she wondered if that advice had cost her more than it gave. Across town, Daniel was sitting on the edge of his son's bed. The small apartment was quiet except for the hum of a ceiling fan and the faint crackle of a streetlight outside. Eli's drawings, airplanes, helicopters, stars, covered the wall above his desk. You look tired, Dad, the boy said sleepily. Yeah, Daniel said softly, brushing a hand through Eli's hair. Long day at work. Eli smiled faintly. Did you fix something? Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, buddy. I fixed something. Eli's eyes fluttered closed, his breathing steadying. Daniel sat there in the glow of the nightlight, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe, just maybe, that moment in the hangar had shifted something bigger than he understood. Back at Voss Aerotech, the hangar was dark except for a single maintenance light above the helicopter. Elena stood there alone now, her heels echoing softly on the concrete floor. The machine sat silent, almost breathing, its surface gleaming faintly under the light. She reached out and placed her palm on its side. It was still warm. She thought about what he'd said. You take care of people. Machines last longer. It was such a simple sentence, but it had the weight of truth she'd avoided her whole career. Her eyes drifted toward the janitor's station near the wall. The bucket, the cart, the empty space where Daniel had stood. For the first time, she wondered what his life looked like beyond this place. Did he go home to anyone? Did he have someone waiting for him, the way she used to wait for her father to return from his business trips? The thought unsettled her more than she cared to admit. She checked her watch. 11:42 p.m. The city lights beyond the hangar windows flickered like distant stars. She exhaled and pulled out her phone. This time, she didn't hesitate. Get me the district facilities coordinator, she said when her assistant answered groggily. There's a public school, Lincoln Elementary. I want the power restored tonight. There was a pause on the other end. Tonight, ma'am? That's no budget limits, she said, voice low but firm. Just get it done. She hung up before they could question her further. Then, in the stillness, she looked once more at the helicopter. It gleamed like a confession. By dawn, workers in yellow vests were outside Lincoln Elementary, rewiring circuits and testing lights. The gym flickered to life, brighter than it had in years. When the first kids arrived, they gasped. Eli Cole stood in the doorway, backpack slipping off his shoulder, staring at the glow that spilled into the hallway. His eyes widened, and a slow smile crept across his face. We fixed the sky, he whispered. Back at the hangar, Elena arrived early, before anyone else. She stood by the helicopter, alone, watching the sunlight crawl across the polished floor. For the first time in years, she didn't feel powerful. She felt human. And though she didn't know it yet, this humility would be the thing that saved her. If you were Elena, someone who built her life on control, only to be undone by grace, what would you have done after that night? Would you tell him you helped his son's school? Or keep it a secret? Let me know in the comments, because what she does next will change both their lives forever. The city was half asleep when Elena Voss sat alone in her office. Midnight wrapped around the glass tower like a shroud, and rain traced crooked rivers down the windows, distorting the world beyond. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, motionless, framed by monitors that glowed cold blue against the dark. The hum of the central air was the only sound. Even the city below seemed to hold its breath. A folder sat open on her screen, Employee Database, Voss Aerotech, Maintenance Division. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before she typed the name, Cole, Daniel. The search bar blinked. One entry. She clicked it. At first, the file was unremarkable, janitorial shift records, clean attendance, no complaints. Then she scrolled further down and froze. Former rank, Captain. U.S. Army Aviation Maintenance Division. Honors, Distinguished Service Medal. Bronze Star. 2 commendations for field repair innovation under combat conditions. Discharged, honorably. Elena leaned forward, her pulse quickening. Captain. Not corporal. Not mechanic. Captain. She clicked on the attached field report. Her screen filled with images. Helicopters in desert heat, rotors blurred by dust storms, soldiers crouched beneath half-functioning aircraft. In one photo, Daniel stood beside a downed Black Hawk, his face streaked with grime and sweat, eyes calm despite the chaos around him. He'd once commanded entire flight maintenance teams, the kind of people her company recruited for 6-figure salaries. Yet here he was, mopping her hangar floor. Why? She scrolled deeper into the report. One line stopped her. Casualty notification. Next of kin Sarah Cole, deceased, 2018. Vehicular accident. Survived by infant son, Elijah Cole, DOB 2017. Elena's breath hitched. The pieces clicked together. His exhaustion, the quiet sadness in his eyes, the simplicity of his request. Just fix the lights at my son's school. He hadn't been humble. He'd been protecting what little remained of his world. She sat back, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time in years, the ice she'd built around herself began to crack. Her mind rewound to the hangar earlier that day. The way he'd moved, the surety in his hands, the calm in his voice. The look that wasn't defiance but control. She realized then, Daniel Cole wasn't a man trying to prove himself. He was a man trying not to break again. The realization hit her harder than she expected. Elena closed the file, leaned back, and stared out the rain-blurred glass. Manhattan sprawled below, indifferent and glittering. The hum of the city usually soothed her. It was proof that everything was still functioning, still under control. But tonight, that noise felt hollow. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message. A notification from her assistant. Power restored at Lincoln Elementary. Project completed at 3:42 a.m. No media involvement. Elena exhaled slowly. The message should have satisfied her. It didn't. She swiveled her chair toward the window again, the blue light from her monitor casting her reflection into 2 halves, one sharp and composed, the other faint and almost human. She watched herself, searching for the version of Elena Voss who'd once believed she could lead without losing compassion. But that version was long gone. Or so she'd thought. Hours passed. The rain softened to mist. Elena's office felt too large, too quiet. She rose, crossing to the cabinet by her desk where an unopened bottle of scotch waited. A gift from an investor she didn't remember. She poured half a glass, let the liquid catch the city light, then set it down untouched. Her gaze drifted back to the monitor. She reopened the file. This time, she clicked on the attached testimonial, letters from Daniel's commanding officers. Cole performed miracles with machines that should have never flown. He saved 12 soldiers after repairing a rotor system under fire. He refused evacuation until the last man was airborne. 12 soldiers. Saved by the same hands she'd humiliated. Elena's throat tightened. She reached for her glass and took a slow sip, the warmth burning down her chest, loosening something trapped beneath the surface. For years, she had prided herself on knowing every corner of her company, every project, every person. But this man had been invisible to her until he embarrassed her pride. The irony stung. She imagined him that night after the hangar, walking home through the rain, drenched, tired, probably carrying that mop like it weighed nothing compared to what he'd already carried in life. She wondered what his home looked like, what kind of father he was. "Why is he mopping floors?" she murmured aloud. The sound of her own voice startled her. It cracked against the silence, brittle and raw. She set the glass down and stared at the city again. The rain streaks on the window looked like veins of light, branching across her reflection. Then came the whisper, almost involuntary. What have I done? It wasn't about the words she'd said to him. It was about the years she'd spent treating people like tools, believing efficiency required cruelty. Her father had taught her that leadership meant fear. Her mother's death had taught her that love was weakness. But Daniel, without saying a single cruel word, had proved both lessons wrong. In that moment, she didn't feel like a CEO. She felt like a woman standing on the wrong side of a mirror, seeing her own humanity for the first time in years. She turned back to the screen and stared at Daniel's photo again. His military ID shot was formal, buzz-cut hair, square shoulders, a faint scar above his brow. But the eyes were unmistakable, the same quiet steadiness she'd seen in the hangar. The kind that came from surviving more than one kind of war. She clicked print. The hum of the machine filled the room as his photo slid out onto the tray. She picked it up, her fingers brushing the paper edge. Then, without fully understanding why, she pinned it to the corkboard behind her desk, among blueprints, contracts, and production charts. For the first time in that office, a human face looked back at her. The following morning, her assistant arrived early, startled to find her still at her desk. Elena was staring at the board, the faint circles under her eyes betraying a sleepless night. "Ms. Voss," the assistant asked cautiously, "should I schedule your calls for?" "Cancel everything until noon," Elena interrupted. "But, just do it." The assistant nodded and slipped out, confused. Elena leaned forward, elbows on the desk, chin resting on her hands. The rain had stopped, and the morning light turned the window into a mirror again. She could see her own reflection beside Daniel's printed photo. Two lives separated by class, tragedy, and choices. Maybe she thought that was why his words lingered. You take care of people. Machines last longer. She had spent her entire career keeping machines alive. Now, for the first time, she wondered if she'd been killing something else in the process. Later that evening, she walked through the nearly empty hangar. The helicopter gleamed under the dim lights, quiet and proud. A few engineers worked quietly nearby, but avoided eye contact. They still didn't know what to say to her. Elena stopped beside the aircraft, running her hand along its polished surface. The cold metal under her fingertips sent a shiver through her. This machine, this symbol of her success, had brought her face to face with her own failure as a person. "Thank you," she whispered under her breath, unsure if she meant Daniel or the helicopter itself. The air smelled faintly of oil and ozone, sharp but grounding. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to control everything around her. She simply stood there, listening to the silence. Later that night, she sat back at her desk, reopened Daniel's file, and added a note to his record manually. Recommendation: transfer consideration, technical division, restricted clearance reinstatement pending review. She stared at the line for a long time, then deleted it. It wasn't time yet. He wouldn't want pity dressed as promotion. Instead, she picked up the phone. "Get me the facilities lead," she said quietly. "District 9. A pause on the other end. "There's a school," she continued. "Lincoln Elementary. I want their lights working by dawn." The voice on the other line hesitated. "Already done, ma'am." Elena's eyes lifted to the photo on the board. Daniel's calm gaze seemed to meet hers, steady, unjudging. She smiled faintly. "Then let's keep it that way." Outside, thunder rolled across the city. The lights flickered, then steadied again. For the first time in years, Elena didn't feel the need to run from the rain. She simply sat there, letting the sound of it wash over her. Somewhere, in a modest apartment across town, a little boy's laughter echoed under the glow of new gym lights. And though she'd never admit it aloud, that sound, imagined or not, felt like the first thing she'd truly built that mattered. If you were Elena, would you have looked up his file? Would you have wanted to know the truth, even if it made you see yourself differently? Tell me in the comments, because from this night forward, her story, and his, will never be the same. The first sound that morning wasn't the alarm clock. It was laughter, dozens of children's voices echoing down the hallways of Lincoln Elementary, alive, bright, and startled by joy. The janitor who opened the building was the first to see it. The gym lights. They were on. All of them. Not the weak, flickering kind that coughed to life and buzzed through the day, but clean, powerful beams of light that poured across the polished floor like sunlight caught in glass. The robotics club arrived before the first bell, backpacks swinging, sneakers squeaking across the floor. Eli Cole froze at the door, eyes wide as he looked up at the ceiling. The lights glowed steady and perfect, no shadows, no hum. His face lit up just as brightly. "They fixed it," a girl whispered, clutching a half-built drone. "No," Eli said, a slow smile forming. "We fixed it." He dropped his backpack and ran to the workbench, pulling out his small drone from its case. His teammates gathered around, still stunned. No one had expected this. The school's power issue had been dragging for weeks. Teachers had shrugged, the district blamed budgets, parents sighed. Everyone had accepted the darkness. But not anymore. Now, under the new lights, the little group of children worked like something inside them had been reignited too. Soldering irons glowed, propellers clicked, code ran. When the drone finally lifted, small and steady, the entire class erupted in cheers. It hovered just below the ceiling, circling like a proud little bird. From the hallway, Principal Reyes paused and smiled. "Well," she said quietly to the custodian beside her, "looks like someone decided these kids deserved a miracle." Across town, Daniel Cole was locking his toolbox when his phone buzzed. A text from the school's automated system. Power restored at facility. After-school programs resumed today. He frowned. That couldn't be right. He'd checked with the district just 2 days ago. They said funding wouldn't come through until next month. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they'd done a temporary fix. Still, something in his gut told him otherwise. He clocked out early. By the time he reached the school, the afternoon sun was already dipping low, streaking the sky with orange and violet. He parked across the street and walked toward the gym doors, the faint hum of machinery and laughter spilling through the glass. Inside, he froze. The place was glowing. Every light worked, every socket hummed. He could smell the faint tang of new wiring, the scent of fresh circuits and possibility. Eli spotted him immediately. "Dad!" he shouted, waving from the middle of the gym. "Look." Daniel walked closer, trying to absorb the sight. Kids crowded around tables, building, coding, testing. The walls, once dim and silent, now buzzed with energy. Eli grabbed his hand, dragging him toward the small drone hovering in the air. "We finally did it," he said, beaming. "The drone flies perfectly. And guess what? Ms. Tanner said the lights came back overnight. They just came on. Isn't that crazy?" Daniel's throat tightened. He looked up at the fluorescent panels, bright and clean. He didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Not after the hangar. He crouched down so he was level with his son. "Hey," he said softly, voice thick. "You did good, buddy. You really did fix the sky." Eli grinned. "I told you we could." Daniel smiled, but his mind was somewhere else. On a woman in a magenta suit, standing in a hangar filled with silence, her face unreadable as he'd walked away. He remembered her eyes, the flicker of something almost human that had surfaced for just a second. Could she have? No. It didn't make sense. Why would someone like her care? Still, the thought wouldn't leave him. Later that evening, the school hallways were empty except for the soft buzz of the vending machine and the echo of his footsteps. He'd stayed behind to help clean up, stacking chairs and collecting tools. Eli was in the corner, carefully folding his blueprints, his brow furrowed in concentration. Daniel paused, looking at him. His son, the last living piece of everything he'd lost and everything he still fought for. "You know," he said quietly, "when your mom and I used to talk about the future, she always said you'd build something that touched the sky." Eli smiled without looking up. "You helped me build it, Dad." That simple sentence pierced deeper than any medal or honor could. When the cleanup was done, they stepped outside into the cool night. The gym lights spilled out through the glass like a beacon, painting the sidewalk in gold. Daniel turned back once, staring at them. Something about the brightness felt personal, intentional. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his old dog tag, and rubbed the metal between his fingers, a habit from years ago. The edge was worn smooth from time, but the engraved words still caught the light. Hold fast. Hold fast. He had no proof, but his instincts, those same instincts that had kept helicopters alive under fire, told him this wasn't luck. Someone had done this for him. For his boy. But why anonymously? Why not tell him? Across the street, a black sedan idled under a flickering streetlight. The engine purred quietly. Inside, Elena Voss watched through the tinted glass, her face half hidden by shadow. She'd told herself she wasn't coming here to watch, only to make sure the work was complete. That was the official reason. The truth was something else entirely. When she saw the boys smile, the way he ran to his father, the way the light danced across their faces, something inside her chest ached in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her driver turned slightly. "Ma'am, are we waiting for someone?" She didn't answer at first. Her gaze lingered on Daniel, still standing there, unaware, his hand resting protectively on Eli's shoulder. "No," she said finally, voice low. "We're done here." The car rolled forward slowly, blending into traffic. But she couldn't help herself. One last glance in the mirror. Daniel was still watching the lights. He looked peaceful. She hadn't seen peace on a man's face in years. Back inside the car, the city lights flickered against the rain-streaked window, mirroring the gym's glow. Elena leaned her head against the glass and closed her eyes. The warmth she'd seen between father and son lingered behind her eyelids. That was what she'd been missing all along. Not control, not perfection. Connection. For the first time in her adult life, she didn't feel powerful or invincible. She felt small and human, and it didn't scare her. It felt like breathing after years underwater. Across the city, Daniel tucked Eli into bed that night. The boy's drone sat proudly on the nightstand, its tiny propellers still from the day's flight. "Dad," Eli mumbled sleepily, "do you think the lights will stay on this time?" Daniel smiled faintly, brushing hair from his son's forehead. "Yeah, buddy. I think they will." Eli yawned, curling under the blanket. "I wish Mom could have seen it." "Me too," Daniel said quietly. He sat there for a while, listening to his son's breathing steady, the soft rhythm of a child safe in the light. The apartment felt warmer tonight, somehow. He couldn't explain it. When he finally stood, he crossed to the window. The city shimmered beyond, thousands of lights, each one a heartbeat. But his eyes caught on something else. Across the street from the school, under the same flickering lamppost, a car sat idling. Sleek, black, motionless. He could just make out a faint silhouette in the driver's seat. Watching, he blinked, and the car's lights flicked on. It pulled away, disappearing into the dark. Daniel stood there a long time, the reflection of the street still glowing in his eyes. He didn't know why, but somehow he felt seen. If you were Daniel, and someone you thought despised you quietly changed your son's life, would you confront them? Thank them? Or let the mystery be enough? Tell me in the comments, because soon the truth won't stay hidden. 3 weeks later, the hangar was alive again, but this time it wasn't under the harsh glare of cold floodlights. Morning sunlight filtered through the high windows, soft and golden, catching on the curve of the helicopter's frame like it was blessing it rather than dissecting it. Dust floated through the beams like tiny pieces of calm, a kind of peace that Voss Aerotech hadn't known in a long while. But even peace trembles before a test flight. Elena Voss stood near the aircraft, tablet in hand, her magenta suit replaced with a muted gray one. She looked different, less like a symbol, more like a person. Her team moved carefully around her, quieter than usual. Maybe it was the memory of last time, the humiliation, the miracle, or maybe it was because they could feel something in her had shifted. The machine had stalled again. Same model, same system, same frustrating silence where there should have been power. Elena glanced at the diagnostic screen, her reflection ghosted in the glass. Numbers flickered. Warnings pulsed red. She'd already gone through 3 engineers this morning, each offering the same answer in different tones of apology. "We don't know what's wrong." Normally, she would have barked orders, pushed harder, demanded solutions. But now she just stood there, lips pressed tight, staring at the helicopter like it was testing her instead of the other way around. Then, in the corner of her eye, movement. Daniel Cole. He was pushing his mop bucket past the hangar doors, head down, same quiet stride. He'd been assigned to a different shift since the incident, maybe to keep him out of sight, or maybe to protect him from her. She wasn't sure anymore. But seeing him now, something inside her chest did a small, unexpected thing. It softened. She called out before she could stop herself. "Mr. Cole." The sound of his name startled her as much as it startled him. He turned, meeting her gaze across the hangar. The entire team froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. A few engineers exchanged puzzled looks. Elena exhaled, lowering the tablet. I need your help. The words felt foreign in her mouth, unpracticed, fragile. But they were true. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then looked at the helicopter. Same problem? He asked, his tone calm. Worse, she said quietly. He hesitated, then set the mop aside and walked toward her. No arrogance, no hesitation, just that steady, composed presence that somehow steadied everyone around him too. The engineers made room without needing to be told. As Daniel approached, the sunlight hit him just right, illuminating the streaks of gray at his temples, the oil stains on his forearms, the kind of quiet resilience that no title could measure. He stopped a few feet away. You sure about this, ma'am? Elena nodded once. Yes. Then, after a pause that seemed to last forever. And thank you. He didn't reply right away. But something in his eyes softened too. She handed him the tablet. Systems locking out the starter sequence. Everything reads functional, but it won't engage. Daniel scanned the data quickly, his brow furrowing. It's not the sequence, he murmured. It's a feedback error in the pressure sensors. They're reading overload, but the line's clean. She tilted her head. Then what is it? He crouched near the intake panel, fingertips brushing along the metal. Air bleed valve, he said after a moment. If the calibration's off by even a millimeter, the computer shuts down ignition to prevent turbine surge. Elena blinked. That's not in the manual. He smiled faintly. No, ma'am. That's in the field. He went to work methodically, opening the panels with the same ease as before, though this time no one laughed or whispered. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, watching him. Elena found herself standing closer than necessary, handing him tools before he even asked. She noticed the fine tremor in his left hand when he reached for a wrench, an old injury maybe. Without thinking, she steadied the tool in his grasp. He glanced up at her, eyes meeting hers briefly. Thanks, he said simply. Don't mention it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was alive, filled with an unspoken rhythm, like two instruments finally learning how to play in tune. You know, he said after a few minutes, not looking up, I didn't expect to still be working here. Elena frowned. Why's that? He shrugged lightly. Usually, people don't like being embarrassed in front of an audience, especially people in charge. She looked down at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Maybe I deserved it. He stopped tightening the bolt, surprised. Most bosses wouldn't say that. Most bosses aren't learning how to apologize, she replied quietly. Their eyes met again, this time longer, steadier. She felt something stir, not romantic yet, not quite forgiveness either. Just understanding. When he finished, Daniel stood and wiped his hands on a rag. All right, he said. Try it now. Elena nodded at the technician at the console. Initiate startup. The hangar filled with a rising hum, the soft mechanical heartbeat of a machine coming back to life. The rotors twitched, hesitated, then began to spin. Slowly at first, then faster. The turbine whined, pressure climbing. Steady, Daniel said calmly, watching the gauges. Keep it under 12,000 RPM. The sound grew into a roar. The helicopter lifted slightly, blades slicing sunlight into ribbons. A ripple of awe passed through the engineers. Elena stood frozen, the vibration thrumming through her bones. He'd done it again. But this time, she hadn't mocked him into it. She'd asked. She turned to him. You don't need to promise me anything this time, he said with a small smile, almost teasing. Elena's voice was softer now, a rare warmth threading through it. Maybe I do. The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. When the helicopter finally settled back down, the rotors slowed, and the noise faded into a comfortable hush. The team erupted in applause, some cheering outright. But Elena didn't join them. She was too busy watching him. Daniel stepped back, hands at his sides, expression calm but eyes flickering with something deeper. He didn't bask in the attention. He didn't boast. He just was. And for the first time in her life, Elena felt the strange, grounding pull of respect untainted by fear or ambition. It wasn't admiration for his skill alone. It was for who he was. After the crowd dispersed, she found him cleaning his tools near the storage unit. Mr. Cole, she began. He looked up. Yes, ma'am. I reviewed your record. He stilled, hands tightening slightly. That right. You saved 12 soldiers, she said quietly. Under fire. He didn't answer immediately. Then, I just did what I was trained to do. Then you trained better than most. He gave a short nod. That was a long time ago. Still, she said, I think the world could use more men who do their best when no one's watching. He met her eyes again, a trace of emotion crossing his face. And fewer people who mock them for it. The words weren't cruel. Just honest. She nodded, accepting the hit. Fair enough, she said softly. The afternoon light shifted, turning the hangar gold. For the first time in months, the place didn't feel like a factory. It felt alive, full of quiet possibility. As they walked toward the exit, side by side, Daniel paused near the open door. The wind from the spinning rotors brushed his face. You ever fly? He asked suddenly. Elena shook her head. No. My mother was the pilot. I stayed on the ground. He studied her for a moment, then said, Maybe it's time to change that. She smiled faintly. One step at a time, Captain. He chuckled, a real laugh this time. The sound startled her, then softened her. As the sun poured through the hangar windows, something shifted between them. Something invisible but undeniable. The helicopter's engine purred behind them, steady and sure. And as Elena looked at Daniel, really looked, she felt her own pulse steady too. It wasn't love yet, but it was beginning. If you were in her place, finally seeing the person you once overlooked, feeling that first flicker of respect turning into something deeper, would you fight it or let it grow? Tell me in the comments, because what happens next will test the very thing they've both spent years avoiding, feeling. The city slept beneath them, a quilt of distant lights and whispering wind. From the rooftop of Voss Aerotech, the night stretched wide and infinite, the hangar below glowing softly under floodlights that, for once, didn't feel cold. A single helicopter sat gleaming on the pad, blades still, reflecting the moonlight like a living heartbeat waiting to begin again. Elena and Daniel stood side by side, neither speaking. The air smelled faintly of metal and rain. The test flight had been flawless. The H-90, the same helicopter that had humiliated her and then redeemed her, now hovered in silent triumph below. But the noise had faded. The applause had ended. And in the quiet that followed, the only sound was the soft flutter of wind tugging at their clothes. For a long time, neither looked at the other. The silence wasn't heavy. It was waiting, like the air just before liftoff. Daniel's eyes traced the skyline. He'd forgotten what this view felt like. High ground. Not from a cockpit or a mountain ridge, but from a place of peace. He hadn't known there could be altitude in stillness. Elena stood beside him, arms folded loosely, not defensively this time, but as if holding herself together. The wind teased strands of hair loose from her bun. She didn't fix them. For once, she let the imperfections stay. Beautiful night, Daniel said softly. Elena nodded. It is. She glanced at him, then down at the hangar lights flickering on the tarmac. You know, I used to hate this place after dark. Too quiet. Too many thoughts waiting to be heard. He smiled faintly. And now, she hesitated, exhaled. Now it feels different. Like maybe quiet isn't the enemy. Daniel turned to face her fully. The city lights framed her profile, strong, deliberate, but softer than before. Quiet's where things heal, he said. Something flickered in her eyes, something between relief and fear. I wouldn't know, she admitted. I've spent my life running from quiet, from feeling. Maybe that's why the engines mean so much to you, he said. Noise makes it easier to forget. She gave a small, self-aware laugh. You really don't pull punches, do you? He looked down at his hands, calloused and rough. Not anymore. Life's too short to stay silent. For a moment, the wind carried nothing but the faint hum of distant traffic. Then Elena said quietly, I thought I'd forgotten how to feel. Daniel met her gaze. His voice came low, almost a whisper. Then I guess we both fixed something today. Her eyes glistened, not with tears exactly, but with something softer. She looked at him, and for the first time, saw not the janitor, not the soldier, not the man who had shamed her pride, but someone who understood what it meant to break and still keep going. Below them, the hangar lights dimmed one by one, until only the helicopter's beacon blinked, a pulse in the darkness. Do you ever miss it? She asked. Flying. He considered it. Every day. But not the danger. Just the part where you forget the ground exists for a while. She smiled faintly. That sounds nice. It is, he said. Until you come back down. Her eyes followed the blinking light. Maybe that's what scares me most. Coming down. He turned toward her. You've been grounded too long, Elena. Her name from his lips startled her. Not in a bad way, but in the way a song startles a heart that hasn't heard music in years. She swallowed. I thought being strong meant never needing anyone. Daniel shook his head. Strength isn't isolation. It's knowing when to stop carrying everything alone. For a long time, she just looked at him. The man who had every reason to hate her, who had chosen grace instead of pride, who had fixed a machine not for glory, but for his son's smile. Do you ever wonder, she said quietly, why people cross paths at the strangest times? He smiled. Every day. Maybe this was the universe's way of making a point. About what? She turned her gaze to the horizon, the faint glow of dawn beginning to rise. About humility. About second chances. Her voice softened. About people who can still make something fly after it's fallen. Daniel's eyes lingered on her. You're not talking about helicopters anymore. No, she whispered. I'm not. The wind picked up, brushing strands of hair across her face. He reached up, almost without thinking, and gently tucked one behind her ear. The gesture was small, but it froze time. For a second, she didn't breathe. His touch was careful, like he was afraid to break something fragile. Elena, he said quietly, you don't have to prove anything anymore. Not to them. Not to me. Not even to yourself. Her eyes searched his. And you? Do you ever stop trying to fix everything? He gave a faint, crooked smile. Maybe not. But sometimes the fixing isn't about machines. Sometimes it's about hearts that forgot how to lift off. Her breath hitched, just slightly. The city lights blurred for a moment behind the mist gathering in her eyes. You really think broken things can fly again? She asked. He looked past her, to the dark outline of the helicopter below, and then back to her. Some of the best ones only learn after they break. For a while, they stood in silence, two silhouettes against the skyline, framed by the hum of life far below. No titles. No ranks. Just two people suspended in a moment that felt both impossible and inevitable. Elena looked down at her hands, steady now, no longer trembling with control. She reached out, tentative, hesitant. He didn't move. Her fingers brushed his, just enough to bridge the space between them. He didn't pull away. The contact was simple, quiet, but it felt like the first breath after years of holding it in. Somewhere below, an automatic timer triggered. The helicopter's lights blinked alive again, washing them in a halo of soft gold. She looked up, smiling through the shimmer of tears. You know, she said softly, I used to believe people were like machines, built for function, not feeling. And now, he asked. Now, she whispered, I'm not so sure. They stood there until the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, painting the clouds in pale pink and gold. The world below was waking. Somewhere, Eli was probably making breakfast, the school now alive with light and laughter. Somewhere, the hum of engines and hearts carried on. But up there, on that rooftop, something else had lifted, something neither of them had words for yet. Elena turned to him once more. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For reminding me that sometimes the strongest thing isn't control. It's letting go. Daniel smiled, that quiet, unassuming smile that had once disarmed an entire hangar. And for me, he said, it's remembering I'm still allowed to fly. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the sky grow lighter. A helicopter rose from the pad below, its rotors slicing through dawn. The sound rolled upward, a deep, steady thrum that felt like the heartbeat of the world itself. Elena watched it ascend, her reflection glimmering in the glass wall behind them. Then she looked at Daniel, at the man who had walked into her life carrying silence and left her with something like grace. The helicopter banked toward the horizon, its lights flashing once against the clouds before vanishing into the growing light. Elena reached again, this time without hesitation. Her hand found his. His fingers closed around hers. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The camera pans upward, past their joined hands, past the rooftop, past the waking city, to where the sky stretches wide and endless, open to whatever comes next.
Thanks so much for watching till the end. If this story moved you, you're going to love what's coming next. It's even more surprising and emotional than this one. Go ahead and click the story on your screen right now, and see you in the next story.